Croeso cynnes, good evening, a warm welcome to all of you. Many thanks for joining us tonight. My name's Professor Damien Walford-Davies and I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Cardiff University. Ych chi'n ymuno â ni fel rhan o gymuned eang y brifysgol, we welcome you as members of the global Cardiff community, one that includes alumni, staff, donors and friends who are supporting us in our work. And tonight's event, as you could see from that slide, will be recorded and you will receive a link afterwards. And as ever, you're very welcome to share that yourselves. Un pwnc and siaradwyr hyn yma felly, I'm delighted this evening that we're showcasing Cardiff Business School, known locally as CARBS to us, the world's first public value business school, whose purpose and whose mission are very clear: to make a positive impact on the world by identifying and recognizing value as more than simply economic success. And by bringing, if you like, a public-mindedness, a humaneness, certainly, generosity, innovation to the business sector. And the emphasis is, of course, on underlying environmental, economic and social sustainability, and a commitment very much underpinned by that innovative and world-leading legislation we have in Wales, which takes stock of the rights of generations as yet unborn. It's a very dramatic, very far-sighted piece of legislation. Wy'n cyfeirio, wrth gwrs, yn benodol at ddeddf llesiant cenedlaethau'r dyfodol, yr un ni mor falch ohono fe yng Nghymru. And a deserved spotlight tonight also on the Hodge Foundation. The Hodge Foundation is a long-standing supporter of the business school's work, and it funds research and activities with specifically public value benefits to Welsh communities and Welsh society more generally. In a recent case, through a 3-year programme of 5 PhD studentship projects, field research work, student placements, and early-stage social enterprise support. So the Hodge Foundation has wrapped all of that around CARBS's public value work. Ein siaradwyr felly. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers this evening who will share more about their research in the space I've just outlined, supported, as I say, by the Hodge Foundation Public Value Programme. And our speakers are Professor Luigi De Luca, Professor of Marketing and Innovation at Cardiff Business School, and PhD students Marina Kacar and Suzanna Nesom. Beth yw'r fframwaith felly ar gyfer ein session ni? A quick roadmap of this evening's session for you. We'll hear from all three shortly, and following this, we'll have an opportunity, as we normally do, for questions and answers. And just to say something housekeeping-wise very quickly about that, we've had some questions in advance, and if you have any to ask that have not yet been submitted, you'll have a chance to enter those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen when I say that that is open, and we'll answer as many as time permits. But that's enough from me. As an introduction, I'm delighted to ask Luigi first, then followed by Marina and Suzanna to present Croeso i'r tri ohonoch chi. Thanks, Luigi.
Thank you, Damien, for the introduction, and welcome to our audience. Starting from the very title of this webinar, I'd like to start by explaining what we mean by public value and why we think this is important. So public value means that business should create value and prosperity, not just for shareholders, executives, and customers, but also for employees, ordinary citizens, and communities. Unfortunately, we know that many, if not all, of the grand challenges we face today are the flip side, or if we want, the dark side of business models, business practices, products, and services that we adopt as a solution to our needs every day. In some cases, we experience these problems directly, but more often we offload them on other social groups, other geographies, or, as you mentioned, even on future unborn generations. For example, let's think about the current debate on the benefits and potential long-term societal risks posed by artificial intelligence and who's going to win and lose in a future AI society. So the aim of public value research is to understand these complex relationships and to identify new innovative solutions to make business activities more sustainable, equitable, and fair. So through our research, education, and engagement, we aim to help individuals, organizations, and communities, both locally and globally, to better understand, mitigate, and prevent the root causes of these problems using new mindsets, tools, and management approaches that we promote at Cardiff Business School. So the presentations that will follow by Marina and Suzanna are some perfect examples of public value research topics tackled by our doctoral students and colleagues at Cardiff Business School. The first project, funded, as you mentioned, by the Hodge Foundation, looks at digital exclusion, or the problem of digital divide, as a social problem stemming from the digitalization of every aspect of our life. The second project, funded by the Economic and Social Research Council of the UK government, or the ESRC, looks at the drivers and determinants of gender pay gap in different areas of the UK. So I now hand over to Marina for the first presentation.
Thank you so very much, Luigi, for that ultra kind introduction. And a big hello to all of you joining us today. It is both a great honor and pleasure to speak to you on this truly lovely occasion. Now, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Marina Kacar, and I'm a third-year PhD student at the world's first public value business school. Today, I will be speaking about my research, the topic of the digital divide, why it is important, and how it can be tackled via digital inclusion. So without further ado, I will proceed to sharing my slides with you. Before I begin speaking about the topic of the digital divide and digital inclusion, it might be helpful to briefly reflect upon the value of digital technologies for sustainable development purposes. The United Nations have publicly stated that digital technologies can help the world achieve and progress all 17 of their sustainable development goals. These goals set by the United Nations are intended to help us preserve and enhance both society and the environment. They are designed to help us tackle challenges such as inequality, poverty, climate change, and many more. Digital technologies can indeed help us achieve such ambitions. For example, digital technologies have enabled us to democratize healthcare access and even education. Additionally, digital technologies have enabled also geographically displaced retailers to access novel commercial markets where their merchandise can be offered and potentially even sold to a wider audience. However, there is also a so-called dark side to digital technologies. So for me as a social scientist, what is truly fascinating is how every digital technology is essentially a double-edged sword. Now, all of the dangers you see here on this slide are quite momentous, but one big and quite often underrated problem in our digital world is the digital divide. The digital divide is an inequality issue which points to the differences amongst societal members in being able to access and navigate the online world. The way to tackle the digital divide is through digital inclusion. But before I continue, just a quick disclaimer. There are other ways to conceptualize digital inclusion, but today I'm sharing with you the way in which it is stemming from my data collection thus far. Now, everyone I've spoken to about my research knows about this four-legged chair here. That's because I genuinely do believe that it might be a helpful prop to use to help explain a multi-tier concept such as digital inclusion. So according to my data, digital inclusion has four fundamental pillars, or four legs of the same chair. One leg is access to contemporary digital devices and a stable, reliable internet connection. The second leg is skills. Do people have adequate levels of digital literacy, which enable them to independently navigate online domains both safely and legally? The third leg is confidence to engage with digital novelties. The fourth leg is motivation for utilizing digital routes. Now, The biggest mistake we can possibly make is to assume that everyone has the same opportunities we and those around us might have in the digital world. Our starting positions are unfortunately not the same. According to the United Nations Telecommunication Unit, 2.6 billion people globally are offline. According to a UK charity, Good Things Foundation, 10.2 million people in the UK lack the most basic digital skills. What is really intriguing about digital inclusion is the fact that it is not static, meaning that it changes with time. Why does it change? Because digital inclusion is profoundly impacted by a number of fluctuating factors. This means that individuals can dip in and out of digital inclusion during their lifetime. An example which comes to mind is how the cost of living crisis pushed many individuals out of digital inclusion because rising prices meant that people had to choose between heating their homes or paying their internet bill. Also, a significant portion of individuals opted out of buying novel digital devices due to an escalation in their prices. Therefore, it is abundantly clear that if you have access today and/or a digital device today, it does not mean that you will have one tomorrow. Therefore, anyone can experience digital exclusion. Nevertheless, on this slide, I have compiled a list of those societal groups which are most frequently digitally excluded today. Now, if we do not address the digital divide properly, various members of our society can be prohibited from accessing the services they depend on and even being a part of society today. For example, if an elderly person doesn't have a smartphone and/or data, they might not be able to use app-based parking meters, prohibiting them from going into their local towns, engaging with their communities, and also potentially positively impacting the economy. Therefore, we need to continue providing digital inclusion initiatives. Wales has a truly impressive digital inclusion ecosystem, both top-down and bottom-up. They're utilizing quite innovative ways through digital inclusion to create novel spaces for societal inclusion to occur, resulting in greater societal cohesion. There are dozens of health and social care related examples which I could share with you, but due to time constraints today, I will only focus on one truly heartwarming digital inclusion initiative conducted in Wales. A group of truly remarkable individuals went into care homes with adapted stationary exercise bikes, which they connected to Google Street View. These adapted stationary exercise bikes enabled the individuals in care homes to go back to the parts of the world which were familiar to them and through exercising, showcase to other present individuals a number of memories. For example, they shared where they got baptized, where they went to school, where they got married, and a plethora of other noteworthy milestones. Quite the intriguing and creative way of building health and well-being through digital inclusion. Now, there are plenty of goals with my research. As you can tell, Wales is expanding the meaning of digital inclusion, and I'm looking at it in an anthropologically unique way, which is intended to offer some insights which maybe weren't as obvious as before. Therefore, one of my primary goals is to expand our understanding of the term digital inclusion, emphasize the value of it, and hopefully help alter the way which it is viewed and gauged. Secondly, ample amounts of calls, both from academic and non-academic realms, are showcasing the importance of portraying possible drivers, mechanisms, and overall enablers of digital inclusion. Finally, as an additional byproduct, I aim to also portray additional potential barriers to digital inclusion, helping us understand the hurdles continuously faced by various populations, and also hopefully helping us set proper interventions in place. Now, what is slightly unique about this project is the fact that it is quite different in a sense that it doesn't tackle just 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but all 17, as digital technologies can help us reach and progress all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. However, according to the United Nations Telecommunication Unit, 50% of the goals are insufficient, and the 30% are unfortunately stalled or in reverse. Therefore, the fact that this can be somewhat ameliorated via digital inclusion substantially motivates me to work towards my research goals every day. Additionally, the United Nations have stated that we need to track current developments in the digital world and also help continue to evolve our understanding of inclusion within it, which this project directly responds to. So as you can tell, digital technologies can potentially be a great societal equalizer, but without digital inclusion, they do the opposite and they become a driver of societal asymmetry. Nevertheless, a digitally inclusive society is a society which primarily tackles inequality. Thank you so very much for your attention today. Please do feel free to reach out and join us on our ambitious journey. Together, we can tackle grand challenges and hopefully leave a better, more equitable, and sustainable place for our future generations. Thank you again so much for your time and effort. I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker for tonight, Suzanna, who will be tackling the topic of the gender pay gap.
Thanks, Marina. I'll just quickly share my screen. Okay, so my PhD explores gender inequality in the labour market, taking a geographical perspective to studying the gender pay gap to look at why it varies across areas within Britain. I'm funded by the ESRC, and I was working in collaboration with Rhaid, who are Wales's largest women's charity. Both gender and regional inequalities constitute a widespread phenomenon in the UK, receiving increasing political attention since the UK government's Levelling Up agenda and subsequent policies introduced since the Equalities Act 2010, including the gender pay gap reporting regulations, requiring employers with 250 or more employees to report their gender pay gap across 6 different measures. In this project, I use data from the annual survey of hours and earnings, which is the main source of earnings data in the UK, containing comprehensive and reliable information on the structure and distribution of earnings. These are secure data, as they are confidential and potentially disclosive, so they've been accessed via the Secure Data Service, where full details are available and which collates data for employees in Britain. Oh, sorry. So I guess there's some obvious questions to begin with. Firstly, what is the gender pay gap? How big is it? And why am I researching gender pay gaps at subnational levels? Well, the answer to the first question is simple. The gender pay gap is simply the difference in earnings between women and men, and it's a measure across all jobs. This means it represents an important measure of wage inequality in the labour market, and so accurately measuring it is highly important. This measure is sometimes referred to as the raw gender pay gap, as it provides a raw measure of the average difference in pay between women and men, capturing the actual pay gap experienced by women. The second question is also easy to answer. Using the annual survey of hours and earnings, I estimate the raw mean hourly gender pay gap in Britain in 2022 to be 15.03%, confirming substantial gender inequality in the British labour market. However, and this answers the last question, this measure obscures the variation across areas at the regional and local levels within Britain. At the regional level, the equivalent gender pay gap is estimated to vary from 10.19% in Wales to 16.88% in London, as shown in the left-hand map on screen. Here, you can see a distinctive regional pattern with the estimated raw gender pay gap being largest in the regions in the southeast of Britain and progressively getting smaller for regions further away, including the devolved nations. Similarly, the variation at the regional level obscures the wider variation at the local level, as shown in the right-hand. Here, it's estimated to vary between minus 0.4% in Enfield to 28.92% in Solihull. This negative value for Enfield denotes that women earn more on average than men in this locality. Like the regional pattern, the raw mean hourly gender pay gap for all employees is larger in localities in the southeast of Britain, gradually decreasing for areas further away. Interestingly, this variation in raw gender pay gaps across local areas in Britain is roughly similar to the international variation observed in Europe. A further reason to study the gender pay gap within countries is that we know a lot about the drivers of gender pay gaps from the literature, which is predominantly focused on the national level. However, this type of analysis can have issues with harmonizing data sources from different countries and cannot account for any unobserved differences between countries. National level analysis also do not allow the impact of characteristics to vary across areas and gender, despite the recognition that geography matters to pay. My research investigates what causes this variation in the gender pay gap across areas within Britain. My research applies an econometric decomposition technique widely used in the analysis of gender pay gaps called a Oaxaca blended decomposition methodology, which separates out the raw gender pay gap into an explained component and an unexplained component. The explained component is the part of the raw gender pay gap that is attributable to gender differences in observable productive characteristics, whilst the unexplained component is the bit that is not explained by these characteristics. So in my research, I've applied this decomposition technique to gender pay gaps across all areas in Britain, but obviously I can't show you all of them here. So this table shows the decompositions for areas with the largest and smallest raw gender pay gap at each geographical level to demonstrate some interesting findings. So the first interesting observation is that the magnitude of the explained components is relatively small in comparison to the size of each of the raw gender pay gaps. This would imply that a modest proportion of gender pay gaps within Britain can be attributed to gender differences in productive characteristics. Indeed, for Wales and Enfield, the explained gender pay gap is negative, indicating that women working in these areas hold, on average, more productive characteristics than men working in these areas. Indeed, the vast majority of raw gender pay gaps are unexplained, relating to the second interesting observation, that whilst the magnitude of explained components varies significantly across areas, the magnitude of the unexplained component is more consistent across areas. This suggests that the variation of raw gender pay gaps within Britain is primarily the result of gender differences in the distribution of where individuals work. And finally, you can see that despite there being less variation than the explained component across areas, the unexplained component varies more at the local level, which I then go on in my research to explore what else might be causing this variation. So the public value of my research derives from the policy implications of my findings. And whilst I haven't spoken about all of my research findings, I wanted to quickly introduce the 4 policy implications identified. So firstly, as we've just seen, areas with smaller raw gender pay gaps are not necessarily doing better in terms of gender pay inequality. Secondly, the unexplained component is found to vary on the basis of local area characteristics. Thirdly, the significant variation in the gender pay gap across areas is driven by factors whose influence differs across areas. A comprehensive approach to gender pay gap mitigation should be adopted that recognises the interplay between demographic and macroeconomic factors that contribute to gender pay gap variations, and that this should be focused at smaller geographical levels. Fourthly, the exploration of the unexplained gender pay gap suggests that areas with more employees affected by the public sector equality duties have lower unexplained gender pay gaps, which may suggest avenues for other industries with large unexplained components. All these lead me on to avenues for future research, which include questions on what else might explain the variation in unexplained gender pay gaps across areas, what is the impact of policies on the gender pay gap and wider gender inequality, and how has the spatial variation in the gender pay gap changed over time, and why? So thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Luigi, Marina and Suzanna, thank you all very much for detailing how Cardiff University's Business School is researching the, as you said there, demographics of exclusion and inequality and seeking to mitigate it. And another word used there, Suzanna. And the gender pay gap, just to say, and the digital inclusivity issue are two things that we are seeking and committed to tackling within the university, not just in our research with a focus on an impact beyond the research. So there's an internal imperative for us as well. So let's open the Q&A discussion, and I'm looking at my Q&A function here, and there's some questions coming in already. Thank you very much. Please feel free to post some more there in that Q&A button. I'll kick off with one that was pre-submitted, and it's one that touches, Suzanna, on what you were talking about there in relation to policy implications. What are the plans for disseminating these pieces of research and having a real world impact, ideally in terms of policy change, but what's the traffic, what's the chronology towards creating impact after you've completed the research? So Suzanna first perhaps, and then Marina.
Yeah, so obviously having impact and disseminating findings is very important, but it's also a big challenge, I guess, that a lot of academics might face. I'm lucky in a sense, well, I am lucky that my PhD is in collaboration with Creu, which has meant that for the first few years of my PhD, I was able to work with them, utilising their networks and their expertise. So, for example, I've been able to connect with the UK Women's Budget Group, who had their own project working on using local data and exploring gender pay gaps. I've also been using their expertise to create policy briefings. I've also published a blog, and I've got another blog coming out soon. So I do have some impact of my research, but I'm definitely just at the beginning of that stage, and I guess I'll continue doing that, particularly as I begin to work towards the end of my PhD as well.
That'll ramp up towards the end, won't it? Yeah. Marina?
Yes.
So I have a plethora of plans to publish both in academic and in non-academic domains, my work. The final intention would be to actually add more to the narrative around digital inclusion and to help alter the way which it is gauged in society today. We have a number of surveys out at the moment trying to measure people's engagement with digital technologies, and unfortunately, the questions asked aren't necessarily the questions that showcase whether someone is digitally included or not. Therefore, an alteration in our measurement tools would be the ultimate impact I'm going for.
Okay, thank you. Luigi, do you want to come in on that one?
Yes, thank you, Damien. Just to add a few other notions about dissemination, we do, as a business school, we have a very interesting series on YouTube called the Public Value Podcasts, where our Pro Dean for Public Value, Peter Wells, interviews different researchers and colleagues, not just academics, also professional services, who talk about how they implement public values in their work. We're quite active on social media and situations and events like this one to disseminate. We have breakfast meetings or breakfast briefings in the business school for those who can attend in person, but also in terms of implementing and advising the Welsh government, as the question asked, broadening the field a little bit. We have a track record of very influential policy contribution in terms of the agenda on anti-racist Wales, disability at work, living wage, decarbonisation, just to name a few of the grand challenges we are actively engaging with the Welsh government to influence and improve.
That's really good. Thank you. A really good question here. Did the public value ethos of the business school actually attract you to working at Cardiff? Any of you feel free to jump in.
I can tackle this first because it's an easy one for me. The answer for me is no, because when I joined, we didn't have this public value strategy yet. That was back in 2009. It came a few years later, and I could see how it grew into our values was internalized by colleagues. At the moment and over the last few years, it does attract faculty and colleagues and students, and Marina and Suzanna will say more, towards us just because of this distinctive trait. So not in my case because of temporal reasons, but it is what attracts people to Cardiff Business School over the last few years.
And from the perspective of a PhD student, Suzanna, if I could ask you, yes or no?
So I guess I had an interesting route into my PhD. I started off, or I came to Cardiff to work at the Wales Centre for Public Policy, which is part of the business school. It's part of its public value. It's a what works centre, so Welsh Government comes and asks the centre about a particular like what works in a particular legislative environment. And then from that, I then became a PhD student, liking the fact that it does have this public value ethos around it as well. And my research fits in quite nicely with that public value as well.
Yes. Okay, back to thank you, digitally enabled and digitally included. A very, very interesting question here for Marina. How have you considered that some people don't want to be digitally included all the time? You know, they can delve in and out, but that sense of constantly being plugged in or not, Bluetoothed, you can see where the question goes. Very interesting one. What do you think?
That's a brilliant question, and I'm so glad I get to answer it. Yes, it is quite normal for individuals to opt out of digital inclusion. What I'm referring to when I state digital inclusion is providing those who would like to be a part of the digital world, but aren't enabled to due to, for example, socioeconomic reasons, that they are enabled to join the digital world and to be a part of it. Because what we're seeing now is that health services are frequently migrating to digital modes. We also see social housing, the benefits system in the UK. They're all becoming digitalized in recent years. And a number of individuals who would like to be online and who would like to be using those services and utilizing a number of digital routes cannot. So digital inclusion is about providing those individuals with a chance to do so. But also what's quite interesting, and this stems from my research, is the fact that digital inclusion experts always advocate for choice. So to actually enable individuals to have adequate analog routes as well to the services that they require is quite important. So yeah, I guess the short answer is this is about enabling those who want to be but cannot be, but recognizing that there will be plenty who choose not to, and that's fine as well.
Right, and there was another interesting question there that you've kind of answered as well, around affordable social housing and its linked to digital enablement. So I hope we've covered some of that. Very insightful question here. What with the gender pay gap? How does the gender pay gap affect performance and profitability in companies and other entities?
I'm going to dodge that question because I don't look at the gender pay gap and how it affects firms or anything like that. So I think if I answered that, I wouldn't have the most robust evidence or anything like that. So if that's okay, I'm just going to dodge it.
Luigi, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I think as with many other similar questions, like does more corporate social responsibility improve performance or more diversity orientation improve performance, it is very, very difficult to empirically answer. And when people try to do it, results are mixed and very controversial. What I can say, not in quantitative terms, but based on the research we know, is that the benefits in terms of organizational culture that accompany positive policies in terms of gender pay gap, for example, are beneficial for innovation and performance. So perhaps it is an indirect benefit, but again, back to the direct question, that's a very difficult empirical question to answer.
Okay, thank you. Marina, a question about accessibility. Is there a sufficient accessibility support for less able people?
There is definitely room for improvement, as with ample aspects of society, unfortunately. But what is quite promising is the fact that now there has been an elevation in awareness in terms of various issues faced by a number of societal groups. So I'm going to be quite optimistic on this one and state that I believe that a plethora of positive change is on the horizon. And so, yeah, that is going to mitigate the unfortunate hurdles that these individuals still have to face today.
Okay, thank you. I think we're doing well for time, so I will ask a couple more. For Suzanna, perhaps, how easy is it to get hold of gender pay gap data?
Yeah, I mentioned in my presentation that I use secure data. So that's data from the ONS. And it's from the annual survey of hours and earnings. So it's a really large data set, but you can only access it through the secure data service or through the ONS.
And the ONS, so that people know the Office for National Statistics.
Yes, sorry, yes. And so it takes quite a long time to access that data. So you have to register your project. You've got to show that it has some sort of public value as well, and you have to be an accredited researcher as well. And that's because it captures a lot of information that you might be able to identify people with. So all my outputs, all my findings, they've been subject to a number of checks by the Secure Data Service to make sure that you can't re-identify people from that. So I've got a benefit that I have this data set, and it's large enough that I can explore gender pay gaps in really small geographical areas. But I had the trade-off of then considering the time aspect of that as well.
Right, and interesting there, there is some need to demonstrate the public value of the research in the first place, isn't there?
Yes.
To gain that access, as you say. Marina, very interesting question here. Is the issue of digital exclusion going to disappear over time as those who did not learn computer skills in education decreases? Although we do know, of course, that those without sufficient, or as we would like them to be, digital skills range in ages, don't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's another brilliant question. I have to give a big shout out to the audience for their excellent questions. Yes, so digital exclusion, unfortunately, isn't going to go away anytime soon. If we were to fix the digital divide for good, we would need to fix society as a whole. For example, we would need to solve the issue of poverty in order to enable everyone to have adequate digital devices and internet connectivity. So unfortunately, the digital divide isn't going away. All we can do is do our best to set up interventions to support these individuals, have them be consistent. And also, what I think is quite important is continue to track novel developments in the digital world and update our understanding of inclusion within it. Because as we see these novelties emerging, they're going to shift what it means to be digitally included in society today. So the skills we have today are probably going to dramatically change in the future. Therefore, we need to continuously work on that. And again, digital inclusion is a potential solution.
And you just touched on one of the new questions that have come in around just that, skills. I mean, accessibility is in some way is for some affordability, for others it's skills and the need constantly to be on top of changing skills.
Yes, absolutely. So what I find truly intriguing is the fact that digital skills have shifted dramatically in recent decades. If we think about the emergence of the internet 25 years ago, a digital skill could have been considered generating an email address. Today, a digital skill actually entails being able to stay safe online, safe from cyberbullying, from fraud, from scams, and from a plethora of other dangers that come with digital inclusion. So yes, digital skills are a fundamental pillar of digital inclusion. And yes, they're going to be shifting and evolving in the years to come. And I'm excited to see what will be a digital skill in 20, 30 years' time, given the dramatic rise of artificial intelligence and similar technologies.
Yeah. Interesting one here from Patrick. How much impact does digital inclusion have on social inclusion when we find everybody on buses not looking at everybody else, but looking at their devices?
Yeah,
Sorry, Luigi, go ahead.
Luigi, go ahead.
Yeah, happy to take this one. That's a very good question. And in fact, there is a negative impact. So the idea of getting more people on board with digital technology creates more people who tend to isolate with their devices, and moreover, more people who tend to receive misinformation and hatred online and many other toxic consequences of social media and the digital society. So Patrick's question is very important because it links to a future trajectory of research here, which is how can we, once we get everybody on board, or once everybody is accessing digital technology, how can we prevent the damages that we know happen through these technologies to damage society and institutions? I mean, think about what happened with COVID or the attack to Capitol Hill in the States, or the threats to institutions fueled by that. There's not only social exclusion. So there needs to be a new dimension of keeping the society inclusive in the digital age, which should exactly reconcile these aspects. And Marina and I are working on this in a side project to what she presented today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Luigi. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Mae'r sesiwn yma bob yn tro yn dod yn cwpla'n llawer i gyflym. Luigi, Marina, Suzanna, thank you so much for joining us and giving us a window onto research activities and your research ethos and ethics, let's put it that way. I want to thank our webinar audience. As you said, Marina, excellent questions. We hope you found it interesting. I think the quality of the questions say yes to that. And as I said, if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, we will follow up with you directly. And just a few quick housekeeping elements as a coder here. As I've said, you will receive an email in the next few days with a copy of the recording and links to register for future events. Our next event in the series is an interesting one. Its title is Why Are Girls Less Likely to be Diagnosed with ADHD Than Boys? And that's taking place on Thursday, 22nd of February at the same time as the one today, 5:15. Thursday, 22nd of February, 5:15. Very much hope you'll be able to join us for that one. If anybody watching would like to get involved with Cardiff University, volunteering time to help our students or helping us to fundraise for our research, the kind of research you've just been hearing about, please follow the link in the comments box that has just been flashed up on the screen by Ros just now. And from me, therefore, on behalf of our Vice-Chancellor, Wendy Lana, and on behalf of our speakers this evening, diolch yn fawr iawn i chi, braf cael eich cwmni chi, hwyl fawr i chi.